lady, but yeah, it depends on what happens from there. So we're having a conversation now on the education reforms. And my guest already with me in studio, Amos Kaburu is the Chief Counsel, Opticum Group, and Kennedy Echesa, legal and education expert as well. We're talking about matters education and what reforms that are there. But first, there's a concern that's happening right now. And Echesa, I'll start with you. The government has already released 24 billion shillings of capitation to the head teachers, but they say that money is not enough. Are they being reasonable?
Who is being reasonable, government or head teachers?
The head teachers.
The head teachers are very, very reasonable. And where they are saying that this money is not enough, perhaps we need to break to Kenyans to know what 24 billion means. Government releases about 22,800 shillings per student. And since we are in a normal academic year that starts in January and ends in November, the government undertook to release 50% of these funds in term 1, 30% in term 2, and 20% in term 3. In term 1, government released only 25%. Last week, or this week, government has released about 20%, meaning cumulatively this year, government has released 45%. This means we are still funding term 1 activities, term 1 calendar, and we've not funded term 2 calendar. In fact, government owes 5% to schools, which goes to term 1. Therefore, head teachers are reasonable enough to say that they have not received any funding for term 2. The second reason is the issue of budgeting. Trevor, government is releasing funds based on budgets that existed before 2010. The price of commodities in 2010 is not the price of commodities now. In fact, commodities have tripled, but funding has remained the same. Number 3, this funding was based on NEMIS. Remember, not all students are on NEMIS. For you to be on NEMIS, you require to have a birth certificate. And primary schools are the worst hit. Primary school learners, most of them do not have birth certificates. And their details have not been captured on NEMIS, meaning they were not considered during the funding. Therefore, the schools are finding it very, very difficult to survive this term 2. With a 5% deficit in term 1 and 0 funding in term 2 and probability of term 2 being funded late term 3 and not even funding to the full extent that the government has committed to.
Okay, the reason I'm asking this question is because when the CS Mashogu appeared in Parliament, he mentioned that there's really no crisis in schools. It's exaggerated because parents are paying the school fees.
He is not aware. I think he was not aware of what he was speaking about. First, the distinguished CS lied to Parliament. He lied to Parliament by saying they will release 28 billion shillings. He's on record as having said they will release 28 billion shillings. What he has said they have released is 24 billion shillings. And when you are releasing 24 billion and you are releasing 20% of these, it means out of the 22,000 shillings that the government is supposed to fund, they have only released about 4,600 per student. And then you are aware that ministry retains a huge amount of money out of these 4,600. So what goes to school per learner is just about 1,900 shillings. And our parents, because of the harsh economic times, they have not been able to pay fees. The CS said that it's only 15% who have not paid. In fact, Trevor, if this Citizen TV undertook a research, a quick survey in schools, you will realize that it is less than 15% of parents who pay fees and pay fees on time. 85% they have not paid fees. And that is why teachers, head teachers have asked learners to go home and collect fees because they have to be fed. They have to be taught. If there are no materials and there is no food, schools are not holiday camps. If schools cannot sustain learners, learners will have to be home.
Okay. Amos, what options does the government have and does the school heads also have? Because we are caught in this between a rock and a hard place. Government says they don't have enough money, they send in a bit of money, the principal says that money is not enough. What options do they have?
Thank you so much. I want to agree partially with the Echesa, but also differ with him. I don't think that if we looked at our resource configuration, things should be that bad. I think we're spending and dwelling so much on funds as opposed to resources. Considering that if you look at any setup of any business, the issue of working capital is not just about what you've collected, because it's not what you receive as income that you expense it the following day. That is the reality of how institutions and businesses and even schools run. So that you're going to receive this money today and you're paying everything for tomorrow. So I think it's a reality that you have to brace with. And I think that even head teachers are speaking from both sides of the mouth. And they talk when it's a bit convenient. When it comes to sending children away, they'll use that excuse of, I mean, money that is coming is not enough and such. Yeah. But I think broadly speaking, what he raises is very fundamental, the issue of how do we appraise ourselves with the current demands of what it goes into for us to deliver an education for our children. I think that's critical. But there's even something a little bit more fundamental around who should shoulder that burden of providing education. And I think that largely the people who are suffering that brand are the poor. So it's important that we have a conversation around how can we make sure that we can give the poor an education that is more meaningful. Because if you come to think about what government considers to be the cost of provision of tuition vis-a-vis what additional costs schools are charging, you realize that a lot of our education that is in any form meaningful is very, very private. It goes back to what households are expending on education. So in other words, households are bearing a huge brand. Even when government chooses to rein in on schools, it is almost impossible because principals and head teachers would play all manner of tricks to still continue collecting money from parents. So I think they are also not being very, very honest in terms of what is the actual cost of providing education for our children. If you think about, it's possible to provide education that is meaningful, education that is affordable. But I just don't think that the players in the sector have been a little bit more open on what it means for us to provide education to everyone. Come to think about the exaggerated costs around uniform, exaggerated costs around boarding and other forms of non-essentials. What do children need for them to basically go to school? If you look at what schools are asking for CDF to do for them, to buy for them buses and such, these are resources that could be reconfigured towards other things. So I think let's be a little bit more honest. I have always said that this country does not mine money. We got some oil in Turkana, which I don't know where it went to. We are not going to perform any magic for us to get additional resources. We must just be honest. Okay. Education is consuming a lot of resources. In the highest time we ask for a little bit of not a little bit, but total accountability on the resources that we have invested in this sector. It can't just be a question of plunging resources into this bottomless pit, whereby the results that we are getting out of them are not commensurate with what we are putting in. So yes, to a certain extent, they have legitimate concerns, but I think that the question of accountability cannot escape going forward.
Okay.
I don't know what more you would want for a country such as Kenya, putting in more than 580 billion in an education sector that is still asking for more money. I think we need to be a little bit more honest. And I can tell you that for a fact what Echesa would not want to admit, that our public schools are more expensive than our private schools.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you agree?
Not in Kenya. Private schools could be cheaper elsewhere, but not in Kenya.
In Kenya, private schools in Kenya are cheaper.
What my friends should be telling Kenyans is this. Government undertakes to pay 50% in term 1, 30% in term 2, and 20% in term 3. Now, it is a fact that government has only funded up to 45%, meaning even in term 1, which ended sometimes in April, the government owes schools 5%. Even if it was a question of misappropriation, what are the principles of appropriating? They don't have money. Government does not send them money. And two...
But misappropriation starts from the budgeting. If you exaggerate your budget...
If you exaggerate your budget...
I'm not a government apologist, but counties are here to receive money for March, and we are looking at this to appear like it's the only sector in the
let him finish, and then
budgets are approved by boards of managements and not the principals. The principal is merely a secretary to the board. And the board of management is a creature of the Ministry of Education. And therefore, if we have exaggeration, if we have misbudgeting, it is the Ministry of Education that should be blamed because it has an entity called a board of management in a school.
Okay.
And therefore, it has forced principals to be spending the little money that government sends in terms of capitation on debts. Any system that survives on debts cannot be a sustainable system. And presently, what the principals and the schools are asking is not even the increase in funds.
Yeah.
They're simply saying, you undertook to give this, can you give it? And can you give it in good time? These problems can be solved if government can just undertake to send money as and at when the same is needed. They keep on talking about misappropriations.
Yeah.
We've not seen them match principles to courts of law to charge them with misappropriation. Misappropriation is a criminal offense. They have not been demoted. They have not been fired. So we should not have excuses in terms of funding basic education. It is a right of every child to get education. And now children are home because there is no food in school. There's no food in school because parents might not have paid fees, because government has not sent capitation. We have term 2 games going on in schools. And the Ministry of Education directed principals to find means of ensuring that the games are on. Term 2 activities are on. Indirectly, they were asking principals to let the learners shoulder the burden. They do so verbally. And when parents complain, they come to the media and say, we have never asked any principal to send away children.
Yeah. In fact, this is a conversation we're having. Even the CS, when he appeared, he mentioned that the schools should be more prudent. Do you think he didn't know what he was talking about?
I'm just wondering, when we make discussions sometimes very, very idealistic, to appear like we don't live in this country. And I expected that the lawyer will be more candid. He's one time talking about the government, the other time he's talking about the Minister of Education. And
it is the same thing.
No, my brother.
Government is the ministry.
My brother, you know very well that the ministry does not receive money and put somewhere. These are funds from Treasury. So you have to be a little bit more generous with the truth that the challenges that the ministry is facing are not purely the making of the ministry. Because the ministry has not been given money which is sitting somewhere that he has failed to remit to the schools. That's a fact. So we are facing a problem as a country. And so if we sit over here and speak from a very, very idealistic point and point figures at the ministry, I think it's just failing to be so truthful to what the situation in Kenya is. We have a problem. Nobody disputes that. Secondly, for you to begin telling us that cases of misappropriation, we have not seen the ministry demoting anyone or taking action, you know very well who has a responsibility over the head teachers. And you know the challenges that we've had around the composition of the institution of the boards of management vis-a-vis the institution of the principals. So what we're saying is that, yes, there is a problem, but we must admit that this problem cuts across. It should not be a question of speaking from both sides of the mouth whereby we are speaking conveniently. Let's admit that the entire value chain has a challenge so that we do not take advantage of when now something happens to hammer only one side of it.
Okay. So Amos, as we speak right now, and I'm running some of the graphics on the studio screen so that you can see what was located. In fact, we can put that on the big screen and see. So schools capitation, what has been released so far: secondary school has gotten 15.6 billion, primary school has gotten 4.6 billion, junior secondary school has gotten 3.8 billion. That's a total of 24 billion. What was budgeted for, the budget allocations, is secondary school 60 billion, primary 12 billion, junior secondary 9 billion. Are you saying that this is too much money?
It is not too much money.
Okay.
The problem is the configuration of the resources as they are. And we have given an example. Junior secondary will continue to be expensive for as long as it is designed the way it is designed. For instance, there is no way you'll move from 7 subjects to 14 and expect that that curriculum is going to be cheaper. So these are decisions that we must also appreciate, that when we make certain decisions, they have got the ripple effect. That is the truth. And so unless we are bold enough, and I really hope that the Presidential Working Party, these are some of the things that it has considered. Because we really need now to ask ourselves, what do we need to teach in our curriculum? What is necessary? The question of being too idealistic and spreading the resources too thin is what is not helping us. And I'll give you an example. We are seated over here. There is a primary school called St. George's Primary School. Within 500 meters, there is another school called State House Primary School. And within another 200 meters, there's another primary school called Nairobi Primary School. Those schools are not full. You go to what we call the bumper schools around the Starehe Boys Center. It's not that there is any magic. Go to Umoja and you look at Unity Primary over here, Busara, Kifaru, these schools are next to each other. This is a question of spreading resources too thin. Okay. So this is the point at which we need to ask ourselves, how do we distribute the resources that we have? That is how you achieve efficiency. Okay. Of course, we cannot achieve this one overnight, but these are some of the realities that we need to confront. Okay. So that we are able to define in the bare minimum what constitutes a school. Some of these things are too small to be considered schools. And that's one of the elements that I totally agree with the Kenya Kwanza administration. We need to have something we call the minimum essential package. Even if it means that the school is at its lowest in terms of enrollments because you are not able to realize certain numbers, there are things which you can argue that you cannot look at every school, maybe it has got 200 children and you're still sending to it 1,450 shillings because that's the wrong model that we have used. Let's say that even if you have got less than 200 or 300 children, you will receive maybe a capitation of around 1 million because that's what is able to take care of your fixed costs, so that you don't treat everyone equal. Okay. So we have issues which we can sort out right now. We admit that, release of these funds is creating a working capital challenge, which is a serious strain, but let it not distract us to the bigger issues that we still have to confront. Okay. That's what we are asking. Let's not get so much lost into chasing the hares and the squirrels, and in the long run forget that we have got foxes which are busy destroying the vineyard.
Okay. Trevor, the primary responsibility of a government is to provide education for its children. The issue of we have this number of schools is not here nor there. In fact, capitation is student-based. If State House Primary has 10 students, that is what government will fund. Government will not fund 100 students. And therefore, we are focusing on the learners. Parliament appropriates money to ministries and departments. The Ministry of Education presents a budget to Parliament, collectively as a government. And Parliament will either reduce or increase based on the availability of resources. You've just read to Kenyans what was budgeted for in education and what was provided and what government has given so far. And it is way below the threshold that the ministry and the government had set. If decisions are taken in Nairobi and these decisions affect the common man on the ground negatively, Kenyans have a right to make noise over it. We shall not sit and watch Kenyan students being taken through a process that is not equivalent to what the law desires and say that we are facing challenges. Challenges are everywhere, but can we make education a priority for our children, a priority for our country?
So you think the problem is the lack of
that education is not a priority?
It's not a priority. Yeah. It's because funds have been given for other functions. The schools have not been funded. The schools have not been funded.
It's very, very interesting if we can see.
You go and look at the budget that has been given to the Office of the President, Office of the Deputy President, Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary,
I'm not a government
and yet we've not funded.
But let's not make a lot of populist statements. Look at the overall budget, remove the data and look at what is the capital. What is the allocation going to the Ministry of Education? What is the threshold of you considering that education is not a priority?
Overall responsibility is the provision
my brother,
of education.
Let's be a little bit more, just maintain some level of consistency. When you talk about prioritization, what are the parameters that you are using to consider that education is not a priority?
One, education is the only sector in this country that is funded last. We are telling you that even in term 2, the schools have not received any funding for term 2. Government still owes schools what they would have sent in term 1. Tell me any other institution.
Maybe counties are still owed.
Yes, maybe we should remind you. Maybe we should remind you that recently.
It's not a crisis across.
My brother.
Let him finish, Amos.
Counties are owed the past 2 months.
Okay.
The past 2 months. And even by owing counties, it still affects education. Remember, remember counties play a very crucial role in supporting needy students. Even CDF, there was a delayed disbursement. The truth is, our day schools survive on CDF funding. So when government delays to release CDF, apparently the student is affected. So can government prioritize funding of all entities that have a support or an effect in education? If they had funded CDF early, we will not be where we are. If they would be funding counties early, we will not be where we are.
This kind of skewed arguments sometimes really defeat the purpose. Recently, we saw a case whereby there are even civil servants whose salaries were delayed, including members of parliament. I have not seen anywhere.
By how many months?
Let me just finish. We've not seen anywhere where teachers missed their salaries. So I think let's be very, very sober. I mean, let's be a little bit more consistent in terms of what we are putting forward, so that when we argue on the parameters for what defines prioritization as you're putting it, we are quite consistent. But just for us to argue and say that by refusing to fund certain sectors because they touch on education, it means that we are not prioritizing education. I think it's taking on what your world told us, the wild goose, or what did you tell us? Something close to that. Okay. I think let's be a little bit more candid and say that yes, we have a challenge as a country. Okay. We are facing a challenge as a country. But
so what do we do now?
What we now need to do, I agree with him that resources which are meant for the ministry, now that we are even closing the year, the financial year, Treasury should actually release those funds. But I totally dispute the fact that education is not a priority. Then second, let's look at how do we recalibrate now these resources going forward so that they can serve the purpose. Are there things that we can do with? What is so wrong about our funding model that education every year, we keep on increasing resources towards that sector, but we are still not getting commensurate returns? And I want to give him that example where I told him that public schools are more expensive than private schools. If you went to look at a public school sitting on 10 acres of land in Nairobi right now, and you convert those assets into liquid, and you look at the number of teachers that they have, you look at the entire, what it costs to provide education for children in a public school, and you look at the collection done by a private school, and you compare the two, you'll come to realize that is even before you compute the cost of failure, which you realize that even at this particular resourcing level, the kind of outcomes that you are getting are not commensurate. And that's why you have to take that discussion deeper to appreciate that we are saying that there is something wrong with our model of how we have designed our public education. And for as long as we keep on relying on that model, we are never going to solve the problem. We will keep on sitting on this table and arguing the same. Okay. Because the only thing we're asking for is put in more money. But we put in more money without measures of how to improve what we are doing. And we end up again with the same results.
Okay. I want to ask my brother, before we leave this talk, tell us, we have increased funding to the Ministry of Education. Do you know when last capitation was increased? What schools used to receive in 2008?
So for you,
it's still the same amount. It's still the same amount they are receiving today. And this is why I'm talking about priorities. Schools were receiving 22,000 then, is receiving 22,000 today. A sack of maize was 1,800 then, a sack of maize is 8,000 today. How do you expect schools to run? So if funds have been increased in the Ministry of Education, they have gone to other things other than capitation. And we are saying if we all prioritized capitation, we are going to solve this problem.
It has never been an issue. And I'll tell you this one, because we were here even before capitation started in 2002. And I can tell you, we still were discussing these challenges. We were discussing these challenges. Long even after now, government now began giving the capitation, the situation has not improved.
It is the making of government.
Again, now you see, so you are now going back to what I was telling you, that the problem is our configuration of how we have looked at our education.
Is there.
I mean, who is there? Who is there?
It is government that makes decisions.
Fine. If you want to define it that way, if you want to define it that way, well and good.
It is their configuration.
Yes, if you say that the configuration, that for you when we talk about that we are not part of government, that's good. Yes, I'm not part of government. The configuration of our education is the challenge. Okay. And so it doesn't matter how much capitation you are going to put in unless you shift the fundamentals. Things are not going to change. I can tell you for a fact, if you do not change the fundamentals of how education curriculum is interpreted, curriculum is implemented, and all those kind of things. Even if you are to send a capitation of 70,000 to some of those primary schools,
yeah,
the situation will remain.
Are some of the proposals in the CBC the right direction of changing the fundamental structure that you're talking about? But let's talk about that when you come back here, right here on Monday Report. Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Monday Report. I know there's a lot of feedback coming through. We'll read some of them in just a bit, all right? Stay with Citizen TV.